Hi, this is the last module overview video for 4th grade.
Woo!
Yay! So you guys are going to need to grab module 6 if you don't have it with you already, and you'll want to grab your learning progression. So if you don't have those things, pause really quick, go grab them, come back. Okay, so what we want to do first is we want to go ahead and grab your learning progression, look it over. You don't have to look at the whole numbers and operations for fractions progression. You just really need to look at the decimal portion of it. So once you get your numbers, operations, and fractions progression, if you'll turn to page 9, that's where it starts. It's just the bottom part of 9 and then a little bit of 10. In here, it's basically just kind of reinforcing that the fractions are with the, these are decimal fractions, so you're really going to be using the denominators of 10 and 100. These are called decimal fractions, and in fact, decimal fractions are what they are called. In truth, we've just shortened the name to be decimals, but if you were going to call them its real name, they are really called decimal fractions. But if you go through it, it explains all of that. It gives the information that you really want to make sure that you are focusing on the fractional piece, and Erin will be talking more about that as we go through the module, and I'm going to have her introduce herself here in just a second. But as you go back to flip the page to page 10, I also want you to look at the little example that they have on the right hand margin where they have talking about comparing. Erin will talk about the comparison of decimals, but it has a nice graphic because we will be referring to what we call decimal squares later on, and that gives a nice graphic. So if you haven't had a chance to read this part of your progression, it's not very long. I'd like you to pause right now, kind of read through it, kind of talk with your teammates, because hopefully you're with your team, have some quick conversations, and then start this up again. So I'm going to think that you have read this. So now I'm going to have Erin go ahead and introduce herself really quick, and then I wanted to kind of talk about the test and the rubric scoring that you can use with the test. But I'll have you introduce yourself really quick.
Hi, I'm Erin Ludens, and I teach 4th grade at Enterprise Elementary, so I am living and breathing this math curriculum right along with you. So I kind of went through some of this and picked out some things that would help me as a classroom teacher, and we're going to hopefully get you guys started off in the right direction.
Give you some good things to think about,
yeah,
and to prep ahead of time.
Definitely.
So it's not catching you off guard. What I did want to do before Erin really got going on the module overviews, you guys know when you're looking at the Purposeful Unit Planning Guide, just like we did, you want to start with your learning progression, really look at your essential understandings that you are trying to get across to your students for this particular module. Then you also want to make sure you look at those assessments. We haven't really said a whole lot about the assessments through these other modules, but I think now that we're getting towards the end, I kind of wanted to give you some feedback that I've been getting from some teachers, because as soon as you give the kids the assessments, and here is Jack, I think, hasn't he been the...
Yeah, he's been our student the whole time.
And Jack, if you guys have a Jack in your class,
awesome.
He's a fabulous student. But as you look at this particular assessment, as you can see for problem number 1, there are actually various components to this particular problem. So a lot of teachers are saying that it's been very hard to grade because it seems like it's right, wrong, and they feel like they're not really giving their kids a fair shake. So Lynette and I have really been trying to get teachers to really look at the rubrics. And the rubrics are, after you have the blank test and then you have Jack's test as your nice little sample, then there's this rubric, or what they call a progression towards mastery. We think that this has a lot of value. It goes with the expectations of our progress report because it does have the levels of 1, 2, 3, 4. So we feel like it slides quite easily into just giving the score for a report, and plus it gives the kids kind of a fair shake. Instead of just right or wrong, for a kid can get Jack, if it was Jack or whoever you had, the kid could get a point if they answered fewer than 2 parts correctly. So if they got 1 part or a half of a part correct, they could at least get 1 point instead of absolutely nothing. So maybe they got the answer incorrect, but they started along the right path and they did get part of it correct. So that kid can get some partial credit. Then it does give you to help you, I think as a teacher, if you look at what how the kid can get 4 points, that'll help you see how it can progress backwards. So I like the aspect of just kind of giving the kids a fair shot. I think it's a little, a lot of the teachers that have been using it, they've had a lot of success with it. So I encourage you guys to, if you haven't taken this test right now, go ahead and take that module test so you guys can have some discussion as your teammates. Then go ahead and look at this rubric or this progression towards mastery and see how you might be able to use that as something to grade instead of just right, wrong.
I think that would be good to look at as well at the beginning too, because it would kind of help you grade the math journals and the exit tickets as you went. Because if you're just having them write the fraction and the decimal, but on the test it's having you diagram it and write a sentence and show the comparison, you want to make sure you're practicing that all the way along. So looking at the rubric would kind of show, if you look at 4 points total, that would show what they need to do in completion, and you could practice it all along. So that would kind of help too.
Excellent.
Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the Module 6 overview, and on our copy we kind of highlighted it by topics because it's really important to make sure you're thinking about your math by topics, because sometimes it's easy to get off track and say, oh, we haven't taught this yet, let's throw it in. Well, you need to really focus on that topic, and it's really important in this one too because there's some things you're going to want to teach and you probably shouldn't. So let's get started. Topic A has the students exploring tenths. Just tenths, don't move on to hundredths, just work on tenths. And if you look at either at the progressions or if you go and talk to your 5th grade teachers, they are headed to thousandths, but in 4th grade we only go tenths and hundredths, so kind of just stick there. And they are going to be going between fractions and decimals, and in fact they're going to be going between all notations, and we did that back in Module 1 where we did word form, we did expanded form, we did all of those different notations, and we're going to bring it back again, but we're also going to be throwing in fraction form and decimal form. So I plan to definitely review some of that with my students in intervention or on some homework or something so that they can kind of bring that back up, because we're going to be using it an awful lot. Some of these lessons, even right off the bat, Lesson 1 has a lot of prep work involved in it. Meaning that you just need to have some extra materials that you wouldn't, I wouldn't normally have on hand right up the front of my classroom. So things like scales and weights. Lesson 1 recommends that you use bags of rice, and I don't know about you, but I don't just have that sitting around. So we're going to have to make sure you either talk to 5th grade team or other grade levels and get some of those weights, those little weights that you can put on a scale. It can either be a digital scale or a balance scale, because you're really going to want to be showing what kilograms actually looks like and how it compares when you take some of those away. So make sure you're definitely planning ahead and looking at the materials section. And there is more than one materials section. I mean, there's a materials section for the sprint, and there's a materials section for the application problem and for the concept development. So make sure you're really looking at all the sections for materials.
And on one of them with the 1/10 of a kilogram of those bags of rice for this first one, again, I mean, it doesn't have to be rice, it could be beans, it could be sand, I mean, anything you have are laying around. And of course you need to make sure when you are asking your other grade level teammate or outside the grade level of 5th grade, 3rd grade, maybe even in 1st or 2nd, if they have some of these weights, make sure you ask them if they're the metric weights, because they may have the ounce weights, but you guys will need the metric weights. Right,
so make sure you're using the right, and it really does need to weigh. It really does need to add up to weighing a kilogram, because part of this module is like the actual application and real world application of these things. So we really do want the kids to see what a kilogram is and what a gram is, and showing them all of those different parts.
And really quick, it was making me a little crazy because it said 1/10 of a kilogram. And so I was like, okay, okay, if it's 1/10 of a kilogram, it needs to be 1 of something. So I'm looking it up, and at first I was thinking 1 decagram. I mean, I didn't know. Well, we looked it up.
Googled
it, and according to Wikipedia, which I'm hoping they're correct, it's a hectogram. So if you have 1/10 of a kilogram, it's called a hectogram. They don't have that in this module anywhere, so it's not like you have to use it. But I know some of you guys, if you're like me, you're thinking it's got to have a name, and we think we found the correct name. So in case it was making you crazy.
Okay, so that was in Topic A. You really just focus on tenths. And some extra tools you want to be aware of, because again, this math curriculum is written as if districts have no extra materials, and we have a lot of resources. So Debbie and I kind of pulled some things out that we wanted to remind you of. Remember, we have those place value squares, and those are on, ooh, yeah, that's a little different, isn't it? Place value squares that are all different sizes, and they kind of get, they gradually get smaller or larger depending on what they say, and those you're going to want to have in place of place value discs. If you have place value discs, that would work too, but they ask you to bring those out a lot here in this module. The other one is the place value squares, and Debbie has the teacher version. They're a little bit bigger, and they come in packs of that, and I don't have class sets of those. I think I have a teacher version of that, but they also have them for kids, a kid fun travel size. So
yeah, it is. It's like a travel size. But yeah, the math department, we gave these packets of decimal squares out, and it was, I'm pretty sure it's 5th grade for sure. So you might talk to your 5th grade counterparts to find out if they have these. And then they had sets of 10 classroom sets of, or 15, I think it was 15. So that way they could at least do it in pairs. I know since then other people have bought more, so you may have them around in your building. If you do, grab them. If not, like you said, we have the fun travel size that you can use. But you just get on the portal and you'll find them under decimal squares. And of course, they will be white.
So print them on the green or red. And the only reason they're printed on that color is so they match the teacher version, really. So if you don't have green or red, it's not the end of the world. Also, I did notice this module has a bunch of templates for you at the back of each lesson. So there is a template that has just tenths. There is a template that just has hundredths. There's a template with place value charts that have decimals. There's number line templates. Okay, you just slowly move that in. So we were thinking, so you didn't copy it every time. Either, you know, make some copies of those and slide them in page protectors or laminate them, because they really do use those a lot, and these are going to be hard for the kids to draw, obviously. So have something on hand that they can go back to a lot. And then one more thing I wanted to mention before we moved on to topic B was they are going to be asked to read and write fractions and decimals all throughout this module. And so I was thinking that I would, just to get my kids practicing speaking and saying the fractions and decimals correctly, something that might be useful is putting lots of fractions and decimals on flashcards and having the kids verbally say them, because sometimes if they say them out loud, then they can get them written down too. So they're going to be asked to write and speak those a lot, so kind of prepare them ahead of time. And again, that could be something to prepare them for an intervention early on in the module.
And if you guys have, and if you go on the portal, there is that decimals lesson. The decimal squares that you would print off that Erin just showed you, the fun travel size, the smaller ones. Before those are some different flashcard looking things where it'll show you, it'll have 25 hundredths or, you know, 3 tenths. And you can put those up and have the kids, you know, remember what is it in word form, unit form, decimal form, you know, fraction, decimal.
And I know that there are some fun, like, matching games that you can get where these, and you have to match them to the fraction or the decimal, so you're kind of working between all the notations, you know, the picture or the decimal. So, I mean, those kinds of things, they're going to have to be going back and forth a lot between them, so just make sure they're ready to do that. Okay, so topic B is very similar to topic A, except it just brings up hundredths. So you're going to be using, you know, the green squares, and the other and cool thing was that it's going to talk about the symmetry of the place value chart. And a lot of kids tend to think that the symmetry happens at the decimal, but it doesn't, because there's no such thing as once. So we want to make sure that we tell them that it's symmetrical over the ones place. And the cool image that we found was kind of this, where it showed that it's, that's hard to do. Yeah. Symmetrical over the ones place. So 10 and tenths and 100 and hundredths, and so it just keeps going, but it's over that ones place.
Yeah. So they don't think that it's the decimal, it's this whole one spot, including that decimal. So.
And then you can even go back and explore the, when you move left, it's multiples of 10, and when you move right, it's division by 10. So that still is applicable here, and just kind of like we spent all of Module 1 doing, it still comes back up in decimals.
And I thought I'd share in topic B, if you wanted to have that fluidity between tenths and hundredths, we have found that the decimal circles, and again, this is something that's on the portal that you can download. We got it from Dr. John Vanderwall. Of course, I love him. But this is really kind of nice because what you do is you just make sure that you create a set of these decimal circles in blue and then a set of them in yellow, and then they just cut them, make sure each kid gets 2, and then they just slide them together, and then it just is nice because then they can use this, because sometimes some kids, they can see the linear very well, and others, it's like as soon as you show them the circle, then it's like boom, oh, you know, they just for some reason having that hole in the circular form, it just gives them a clear idea about what does that mean. So as you can see, I hope you guys can see, you can see that the big wedges are the tenths, so there will be 10 in the tenths, and then of course then the smaller lines, little tick marks, then those are at the hundredths. So this should not be confused with the protractor. That's the only thing that we've seen some kids at first, they want to think it's like a protractor. You got to make sure that this, because this is not 360, it's marked in hundredths. But what's really nice is when you want to do like the 25 hundredths, they can actually see, well, yeah, 25 hundredths. It is a quarter of the circle. So then when we start talking about the percents, they can kind
that
of,
would come in handy for
they
that.
will start making that connection, although they don't have to, but for some kids that's helpful.
Kind of just goes with what kids make circles when they do fractions and what kids make rectangles.
Yes.
Some of my students prefer to make circles and some make, so that would be kind of interesting to see if they would prefer that version. Okay, moving on to topic C. In topic C, you're comparing decimals, so you're comparing either fractions to decimals, decimals to decimals, and you're having to go back and forth an awful lot. So one of the things that we want to make sure that the kids understand is if they're going back and forth, to make sure that they have one method that they can go back to make them all standard. So if they prefer the fractions, have them convert everything to fractions, and then they can compare them and convert it back later. So one of the activities we saw listed, they have to order either from smallest to greatest or greatest to least, a combination of numbers. So here is kind of what it was showing. And it's showing it in fraction, it's showing it in decimal, it's showing it in word form, it's showing it in mixed number. And so it's having them compare all of these numbers, but they're not all in the same form. And so to me, it was even hard to do it. So you kind of need to have a method. Are we going to convert them all back to decimals? Are we going to convert them all back to fractions? And really, the curriculum would prefer you converted it all back to fractions, organized them, and then put them back in the way that it showed. So again, this is why at the beginning of this module it would be really helpful to review all of the different kinds of notations.
And again, it also goes back to the learning progression that you read earlier, that it really is getting them to compare to the decimal fractions and making those comparisons.
Something else they're going to do in this topic is using a lot of concrete representation, so meters, sticks, scales, graduated cylinders, and make sure that you have those things prepared ahead of time, because especially with the graduated cylinders, that's not something we do a lot in 4th grade, but in 5th grade they work a lot with volume, so don't skip that part, because they're going to need that in 5th grade. But figuring out why these things are applicable and where in life do we use them is really important. I think that was it for C. Do you have anything else you wanted to add for topic C? So topic C was comparing decimals. Moving on to topic D, and remember this is going to be close to the end of the year, so making sure that you have left yourself enough time to do some of these things. We were even discussing how the test might even get cut off at the end of the year, so kind of plan ahead for a little bit. All this stuff is really important to teach, so be careful if you're just skipping around. Topic D, I even had an eye-opening look here. Topic D says you're adding decimals, but you're adding them by converting them to fractions, adding them like we add fractions, and then converting them back to decimals. So there is absolutely no lining up of the decimals, add, regroup, add, move the decimal down. There is none of that in 4th grade. 5th grade will move into computation with decimals, where they will add, subtract, multiply, and divide with decimals. 4th grade does not do any of that. So if you're having them line up the decimals and add, that is not what you need to be focusing on. What it's asking them to do is convert the decimal to a fraction, add the fractions, and then convert it back if needed. And now one thing that I found really cool on here that I hadn't thought to do is if you're adding them, it showed putting them on the same square. So this right here has 7/10 in the green, 7/10 in the green, and then it's adding it to 23/100 in the orange. And it showed if you put them on the same square, it's a little bit easier to see what happens when you add them together, because you could count your tenths and then you could count all the little hundredths, and you could see that it's 93/100 when you add those together. So it's converting the decimal to a fraction and then putting them together. So don't do any of that line up the decimal stuff, and that's really hard to do, but make sure you leave that for 5th grade, because that is a really big chunk that they do in 5th grade. Topic E is just a couple lessons long, but it's real important because it references money, and money is not referenced very much in the 4th grade curriculum, if at all. But it's not, again, it's not lining up the decimals, it's not adding the money in a traditional fashion, it's converting the coins to fractions, adding them, and then talking about the coins again. So for example, it talks about how 1 penny is 1/100th of a dollar and how 1 dime is 1/10 of a dollar. So it's it's saying if you have 3 pennies, what fraction do you have, or if you have 3 dimes, what fraction do you have. And it's doing a lot of that with word problems. And Debbie and I were discussing that, how this is going to be at the very end of the school year, and how we felt that once you've taught topic A and B, where you've introduced them to tenths and hundredths, that you could work topic E into other times of the day. And I was thinking either intervention time I could work it in, or even just like the opening application problem. I could show some of the money word problems that they have in topic E as my opening, and kind of get the kids exposed to that, because really what they need for this one is just knowledge of tenths and hundredths, and then knowledge of the coins, which you might have to go back and talk about again too. So once you've done A and B, you could kind of work on E at the same time, so that you can kind of make sure you get it all in before the end of the year. Anything else you wanted to add for that one?
I think that's pretty much it. So pretty much, I mean, once I know it's going to be kind of a time crunch.
It is, yep.
And especially if at this point in time of our taping, we have no idea if they're going to cut off those 2 days or not. But maybe by the time you view this, you'll know if you're going to have those 2 days or not. And if they cut off those 2 days, of course, that kind of creates a little bit more of a time crunch. So that's where you guys just have to really think about the module, talk with your teammates, figure out how far can we get.
Yeah.
And because I'm hoping that since you guys have done so much work with fractions,
yeah,
you might be able to go
pretty quick.
Fairly, there could be some things where you might be able, I can take this lesson, and kind of mash them together and kind of do them at the same time. So just think about that. Just because when we saw topic E, we knew that topic E was pretty important.
It is important, and although it says optional on your instructional sequence, it will not say optional next year, because we looked, and that's the only time that money is discussed in 4th grade. So we don't want to miss an opportunity to talk to the kids about money and how to do that with word problems. Mm-hmm. The other thing I was going to say is the work that they've done with fractions is really going to help them a lot here. They're going to be really strong in this area. But I personally feel like my kids are going to struggle with the going back and forth with word form and some of the notations. So I might spend a little bit of extra time doing that to kind of make sure that we can move through this pretty smoothly.
That's a good idea. So I just want to encourage you guys to make sure you look at those assessments, look at the rubrics, kind of really lay out your plan, use those tools.
Yeah, make sure you remember all the extra tools that you can use. It's a lot of stuff's already done for us.
And look at those templates ahead of time and determine which ones that will probably be most beneficial for your students, that you want to make sure you have handy.
Yep.
And other than that, if you guys have questions, feel free to email us. So remember, if you're emailing me, I'm dthompson1@usd259, and you can email Erin too.
Yep.
And
A. Ludens.
Yeah, I was going to say, you might spell your last name.
Oh, Ludens, and just at USD259 like yours.
So make sure you guys email us. We're more than happy to help out and answer any questions you have. So have a great love topic. Bye.
Bye.